Hello and welcome to an episode of Understanding. I'm Craig Biddle. Today I want to address some questions that people have submitted following my debate with Alex O'Connor at Level Up in Atlanta last month. We had a debate about morality and whether it's objective or subjective, and we put the video up several days ago, and a whole bunch of questions have come in, and so I'd like to address some of those today. Some of these questions are under the video on YouTube, and some of them have been emailed to me. But in any event, I'm going to go through about 10 or 11 of them, depending on how much time we have. And if any questions arise in your mind in the process of this that I don't address today, please feel free to either email them to me. You can email things to me through craigbiddle.com. There's a contact form there, or you can just post the questions under the video on YouTube. So let's get started. First of all, thank you guys for your questions. Those of you who have sent them in or posted them under the video. Many of these are good, and it gives me an opportunity to elaborate on a few points that I was unable to touch on during the debate. So this is helpful. Okay, let's start with this one. Why do you oppose using a metaphysically impossible hypothetical example to establish a moral principle or standard? So the important phrase in here is metaphysically impossible, because I'm certainly not against hypothetical examples. I use hypothetical examples all the time. I mean, so, in a book I wrote, you have a hypothetical example. Suppose someone robs a bank and he gets away to the islands with the money. That's hypothetical. It's if this happens, then what are we going to think about it, or what's the consequence here? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that at all. My problem during the debate with Alex was that he was using metaphysically impossible hypotheticals, or hypotheticals that completely changed the nature of human beings such that we're not talking about human beings anymore. So one of them was, suppose people couldn't die. Well, if people couldn't die at all, like you couldn't even die if you wanted to die, right? You would not be a human being anymore. You'd be some other kind of animal. And if that, and I'm not sure exactly what you'd be, but you wouldn't be a human being. So the reason I oppose that kind of a hypothetical for trying to figure out how to think about morality or arrive at conclusions, much less arrive at any kind of a standard about what moral principles should be, it doesn't make any sense to use an example like that. It says, in effect, instead of dealing with reality, let's deal with non-reality and try to figure out through that how we should do things in reality. And so I'm not going to entertain the idea of, suppose things don't have the natures that they have, right? Suppose a bird doesn't have wings, or suppose, as one person put it in the comments on the channel, suppose a triangle has 4 sides instead of 3. Now let's, proceed to try to figure out some geometrical principles on this basis. It just doesn't make any sense. So I know that the history of philosophy is littered with these things. Plato talks about the ring of Gyges, and suppose you were invisible and undetectable and you could get away with anything, or and if I were to put that into the modern term, suppose the bank robber gets to the islands, but he robs the bank, but he's invisible and undetectable, so he can't get caught, etc., etc. We're not dealing with reality if we accept that as some kind of a premise. And I want to deal with reality because that's where we are, and that's where we need morality. So hopefully this is to some extent helpful. Again, to be emphatic here, I'm not against hypotheticals. Hypothetical examples are really helpful, and I use them all the time in my writing. I'm against metaphysically impossible hypotheticals that take us away from reality. If you think about it, this is what happens when people talk about God or hell, right? Suppose there's a hell, and if you don't do the things that God, and he also exists, right, that he says, you're going to go to hell. Well, this is precisely the kind of stuff, that nonsensical stuff that the religious people do. And I am not a religious person, and I'm not a person of faith, and I'm not a person of hypothetical examples that don't make sense. I'm a person of reason and reality, and I want to stay focused on what's going on here. So that's why I oppose those kinds of examples. All right. Number two, question two. What do you mean by subjective, objective, and morality? Now, this is a really good question, and I think we touched on this to some extent in the debate, but I'll elaborate on it here. So in philosophy, subjective, if it's going to carry any meaning when we're talking about morality or epistemology, knowledge, it means the functions of the consciousness detached from, so not corresponding to, external reality. So whims, or just going by emotions, or saying, well, I believe it because it's true, or I choose to, as Ayn Rand said recently, I choose to believe in God. So there's no external fact that her consciousness is corresponding to. It's just the sheer choice to believe in God. Well, that is subjective because it's just completely detached from reality. And then a lot of times people think that objective means that the thing is out there, right? So truth or goodness is out there. And that is not the proper meaning of objective. And Ayn Rand came up with a really good alternative. So instead of having a dichotomy between subjective and objective, she said there's really a trichotomy. There's subjective, which is the just in here, detached from reality. There's the intrinsic, which is the idea that the good or the true is out there. And it's out there apart from any consciousness being aware of it. So this is the idea that, for instance, either Plato's form of the good or the Christian view that, God's commandments dictate and therefore are what is true and good, regardless of whether anybody accepts them, right? That's the idea that good and truth are out there. But neither of these ideas is accurate. What's accurate is, if you think about the historically correct and the sort of Greek view of what truth is. Truth is correspondence to reality, right? It's recognition of reality. And so it's got the in here part and the out there part. And if you're recognizing reality, and so recognition is in here and reality is out there, that union is what objective properly means. It's recognition of fact, recognition of truth, recognition of a particular standard of value and the reasons why it's a standard of value, the facts that support the idea that, for instance, life is the standard of value. And that's why, as I tried to explain in the debate, I think that life is the standard of value, because life is the one fundamental and the only fundamental phenomenon that gives rise to two things: the need of values and the possibility of values, right? So if you're not alive, you can't pursue values. And if you don't want to remain alive, you don't need to pursue values. And this fact is really an extremely powerful fact. If you think about this and toy with it in your mind for a while and understand, and just think about why it is that if there's this one phenomenon, and it's the only phenomenon that gives rise to the possibility and the need of values. So this is why values exist, and they exist to serve this thing. You go after the things that you need in order to live, and a bird goes after the things that it needs in order to live, and so on. And you go after them. Why? So that you can live. Life is the standard of value, and that's what this theory is about. I'm surprised there's as much resistance as I'm seeing to this idea, because it really makes sense. And I think several people have commented in the thread about this and have realized that it does make sense. But the pushing against this is a bit strange, because you can see that it's life that gives rise to the possibility and need of values. Think about it, something that's not alive, a rock or a can, right, or a book. It just doesn't need anything to remain in existence. It just does stay in existence. Living things need things to stay in existence. They have to go after certain objects that serve their life. And if they don't successfully go after and achieve those objects, they simply go out of existence. So that's the significance of this idea of the subjective and the objective and the intrinsic. And I think those are really helpful ways to think about it. So to recap that really quickly, the subjective is in here, detached from reality, so having no correspondence to reality at all. I just believe it because I want to, right? That kind of thing. The intrinsic is the idea that the good and the true and the valuable and et cetera are just out there, completely detached from any consciousness. And in terms, and particularly when we're talking about moral value, a consciousness has to be involved. And so the objective is reserved for the correspondence or the recognition of fact. And I think that can be really helpful as you're thinking through this. Okay, 3. What gives rise to the question of the objectivity or subjectivity of values? What is at stake? This is a little bit similar to what we've already talked about today, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I've already explained objective and subjective, I think, to some extent. But what's at stake, that's an interesting aspect of a question here. So let's talk about that. If it's true that anything I jolly well come up with in my mind is valuable, because I say so, right? That's subjective. That's treating value as subjective, and people do that. The murderers who killed a bunch of students at Columbine High School in the 1990s, Dylan Klebold and Harris, I can't remember his last name. They wrote about their position on the world and their consciousness, and they basically said, if we don't like you, then that means you're evil, and we should kill you, and we're going to, right? That kind of thing. And that's precisely what's at stake here, is that if values are subjective, that means anything goes. That means when the jihadists say, well, we close our eyes and just believe that Allah wants us to kill you, and then they come to kill you, what are you going to say to them if you agree that it's all just subjective? And I'm not just arguing pragmatically here, because I'm not saying, well, it's better to have an objective theory because then you can protect yourself from jihadists. That's true, but it's not the only reason it's good to have an objective theory. It's good to have an objective theory because you want to keep your mind connected to reality so you can succeed in reality. And that is what an objective theory of value and an objective moral code does for you. You want your mind to recognize the facts of reality that give rise to the need and possibility of values, and then having recognized that, you want to codify that into a principle. Oh, because life is the thing that makes values possible and necessary, that means life is the thing that values are for. That means life is the standard of value. And then if we take that idea, that demonstrably true, observationally correct idea, and use it to develop an integrated system of principles in support of life, what you have there is an objective moral code, a moral code grounded in reality that serves your life in reality. And this makes morality literally a science, just like any other science. It's a matter of cause and effect, or the law of causality. So what's at stake here is human life and happiness. And, there's a sense in which, if you think about it, we regard matters of life and death as the most important matters of all, right? On a common sense level, everybody kind of gets this. If you say, what's, this is a matter of life and death, people are like, oh, okay, well, that means it's really, really important, right? And there's, in that common sense understanding of that, it's no coincidence that people get that, because it just happens to also be true that life is the standard of value. And it's the standard of value for the reasons that I've been talking about. But that standard corresponds to and dovetails with this common sense idea that matters of life and death are the most important matters of all. And I think that may help people to get their head around this a little bit too. So chew on that and see if that helps at all if you're wrestling with this. Okay, number 4. How is a reduction of morality to any particular value over any others not an arbitrary endeavor? Well, it's not arbitrary if you link the reason why we need a concept such as morality, or the reason why we need concepts such as value or good or should or shouldn't. Like, why do we need these concepts? If we don't need them, we should stop talking about them and go have a cocktail or play frisbee or whatever we want to do. But there's no point in getting into this stuff if we don't need them. If we do need these concepts, then the facts of reality that give rise to the need of them, you see the hierarchy and the way that there's a structure to ideas here. The facts of reality that give rise to the need of them are going to be the facts that connect them to reality. That's what it means for ideas to be connected to reality, is that there's a correspondence between them, right? And so, it's not arbitrary to say, well, the reason we need the concept of value is, as we ask, well, what are values? Why do we need them? Why do things go after values? Oh, look, when only living things do that. And when we see that only living things do that, and then we say, well, why do they do that? What's at stake? What happens if they don't achieve their values? Oh, they go out of existence. That's the end of the road, right? There's this fundamental alternative of existence or non-existence that living things face. And if they don't achieve the values that they need to live, they go out of existence. So what's at stake is life. And the reason it's not arbitrary, the reason this endeavor is not arbitrary of saying, well, there's one particular phenomenon that gives rise to the need and possibility of values. It's not arbitrary because we can see that it's true. You can observe that it's life that is that phenomenon. If I were to say it's playing frisbee that's that phenomenon, that would be arbitrary because there's nothing to support that. Or screwing in light bulbs is the thing that's the ultimate value. It's not true that screwing in light bulbs or that frisbees or that any other object or thing or phenomenon in the universe is the thing that gives rise to the possibility and need of values. That is true only of one thing, and that one thing is life. So I hope this is to some extent clarifying. By the way, I have a book titled Loving Life, The Morality of Self-Interest and the Facts That Support It. And it goes into great detail about the is-ought dichotomy and how Ayn Rand, through the ideas that I'm talking about here, solved that dichotomy and bridged the is-ought gap. And it does so in much more precise language than you're going to get from anyone in a extemporaneous debate or Q&A like this. So you might take a look at that and see if that helps also. Okay, 5. If the choice between remaining in existence or not remaining in existence is amoral, and by the way, I don't think I said amoral in the debate. I think I said it is premoral, but anyway, keep going here. Then how can the values derived from life as the standard of morality be considered objectively true? Since the very beginning assumption of choosing existence is not objectively good, how can anything that is based on that assumption be held as objectively good? So this is a good question, and I understand why people wrestle with this. I did too for a while when I first was getting into these ideas. Choosing to live as a human being. Now I know a lot of people in this audience, because we have a lot of Alex's fans here, don't even believe that we have free will. So the idea that we choose to do anything is just out of the equation for them. But the fact of the matter is we make decisions all the time. You can't get through a day without making a bunch of decisions. And those decisions are choices. They're decisions that you are deciding. It comes from the same root as scissor or concision, right? You are deciding, you're separating, you're saying, I'm going to do this thing instead of that thing, right? It's a decision. And that's what a choice is. The fundamental choice, in my view, is simply the choice to think or not to think, to use reason or not to use reason. So that's what I mean by choice. I just throw that in here as a clarifier here because the question says if the choice between remaining in existence or not. So I just figured I may as well put the issue of choice on the table here because the guy is assuming that the choice can be made here. So he says, since the very beginning assumption of choosing existence is not objectively good, how can good come from that? We either decide that we want to live or we decide that we don't. At least as adults we do, right? Children don't really make this decision. They just kind of automatically go through their days and they're thinking and there's some choosing going on, but they're not choosing to live in the same sense that an adult is when we know that we have the alternative of not living, and we all know that on some level. And so if you do not want to live, if you do not choose to live, you simply do not need values. That's the whole point of values, is that they arise only because of the phenomenon of life. And if you say, well, I don't want life, then there's no phenomena there for you and there's no value to be had. So that's all that it means. And there's just this technical dependency issue when it comes to values depend on life. And so if you don't choose to live, then values just don't come into existence for you. You sit down and you're done. And you say, I don't want to do that. And look, suicide or deciding that you don't want to live is a really tragic thing. I've had a friend or two actually commit suicide, and it's a very tragic thing. And I'm both puzzled by it, and I also understand it in some cases. People get fed up with, or they have extremely tormented souls for whatever reason, whether chemical imbalances or things have gone very, very wrong in their lives or whatever. And I can understand why people can get to a point where they just don't want to live. The fact of the matter is, if they get there and they really make that decision that they don't want to live, they don't need values anymore. Tragic as the situation is from our perspective, from the people who want to live, from the perspective of a person who doesn't want to live, he is exiting, and he's exiting both life and with it the realm of values. So that's all that it means, really, to say that the choice to live is the fundamental choice that gives rise to the possibility and need of values. It's the same point as the fact of life is what gives rise to the possibility and need of values, except that in the case of human beings, because we can choose to live or not to live, the choice comes in as the thing that gives rise to the need of values for us, at least, again, as adults. Newborn baby is not choosing whether to remain in existence. He's just going after the milk and later his toys and so on and so forth. So that's all that means. In an adult context, we make all of our value decisions by reference to our lives, and hopefully we're doing this. If you're doing this rationally, you're making all of your value calculations by reference to the full context of your life, what it means for you to live a beautiful life, the things that are important to you, your career, your friendships, your romantic relationships, the art that you love to engage with, the hobbies and recreational activities you like to do, right? You have this network of things that hopefully integrate really beautifully, and that's your life. And all of your value decisions are made with respect to that context. So in this case, it's not the case that you're making value decisions and calculations without regard to life. That's just not how that works. But if you choose not to live, then all of that realm is just off the table. Okay, next item. And by the way, if any of this if there are any aspects of any of these explanations that you find not clarifying, drop me another note and I'll take another angle and see if I can clarify further. Number 6, you said that a murderous psychopath's life doesn't have moral value because he violates the rights of others. If it were the case that a psychopath wouldn't harm other people, would it still be the case that he is subhuman and of no moral value? So it's important to realize that when Alex and I were talking about this in the debate, Alex didn't just say, suppose some guy is a psychopath. He said, suppose this guy kills people and doesn't care about killing them. So the particular psychopath that Alex was talking about was a murderer. He was not just some guy who, the definition, I looked it up, of psychopath apparently is a person who consistently exhibits antisocial, impulsive, manipulative, and sometimes aggressive behavior. Well, if that's all, the aggressive behavior is rights violating. I mean, if you're initiating force against people, that's a violation of rights, and that to the extent that you do that, you forfeit your rights. So if someone does that, then yes, they lose their rights to some degree, and if they murder people, then they lose their right to life entirely. You have the right to eliminate one life on this planet, and that is your own. And if you try to eliminate anyone else's life on this planet, then by an objective moral code, you have forfeited your life. So if the psychopath we're talking about is a murderous psychopath, then, meaning he has murdered people, he has forfeited his right to life. His life is of no value to him because he made the choice to devalue it by becoming and I know people don't like this term, but he's by becoming a subhuman by choice. He's choosing, to be a human being is to use your mind and go after your values and respect the rights of others. To do that, this is what it means to be a human being. And if someone says, well, I'm not going to do that part, I'm just going to go after my values, and to hell with the respecting other people's rights part, I'm going to kill people as I want to. If you do that, if a person does that, he makes his own choice to become subhuman. And that's what I mean by subhuman. It's a perfectly good word. It's a word that captures the nature of the choice that this person has made. And so that's what he becomes by choice. Now, to answer the other part of this question, if a psychopath or a sociopath or any of these kinds of terms that I know get thrown around all the time, despite their specific meanings, if anyone has zero empathy or some kind of a psychological disorder, but they do not violate other people's rights, so they're not attacking people or just stealing their stuff or killing them or trying to kill them or raping them or doing anything like that, does the person's psychological problem mean that he has no moral value? Not in the least. You can have psychological problems and try to work through them, and you're still completely 100% human. There's nothing subhuman about you at all from that. Everyone has psychological problems at times, and if someone is born with a chemical imbalance of some sort and really has big psychological problems, then he should work on that and get some help and maybe medications or whatever. I'm not a professional in that area. It's not my area. But if he starts initiating physical force against people, he has, by choice, entered into the realm of rights violations. And that is, to the extent that someone does that, he is forfeiting his rights. And that can happen in degree, and the law recognizes this, right? If somebody steals a pack of gum from a 7-Eleven, he doesn't get thrown in jail for life, but there's some punishment. And if somebody murders 8 people in cold blood, he does get thrown in jail for life, and then there's everything in between, right? And so there are degrees of rights violations, and they're real, but they're all rights violations, and they're bad, and you shouldn't do that. And if someone does, then he is, by choice, putting himself in a subhuman category to some extent. If he steals a pack of gum and then realizes, oh, I shouldn't do that kind of stuff, or even if he commits some worse crime and then realizes, oh, I shouldn't do that kind of stuff, and he reforms himself, he can get back to a respectable place in the world and hopefully get his life back in order and live a beautiful life. But killing people, you don't get to come back from that one. Okay, at least not murdering people. Killing people, if you're killing someone who's trying to kill you, that's self-defense. So that's a different issue. Okay. 7. Many of us fans of Alex are advocates of determinism. So you have to reckon with that when considering the effectiveness of your arguments. So this is a statement, not a question, but the implied question is, how can I reach people with my arguments if they don't even believe in free will? And it's a good question. Um, there's a sense in which even the people who say that they don't believe in free will, they do know on some level that they're making choices because they're making decisions all day. And you can introspectively see that there's one thing that you very distinctly control in your mind, and that is your ability to focus your mind fully on something, right? So oh, I'm going to really pay attention because I want to try to understand something, or to back that off, or to take it to zero. You can just say I'm going to go to zero. I'm not going to be there's going to be no effort at all, right? We even know that you can exert an effort not to know, right? This is called evasion. You can exert the effort to not. I know that's true, but I'm going to put it out of my mind because I don't want to understand it, right? I've put a stake in the ground on this argument that I hold, and I'm not going to hear any evidence to the contrary. And if I do hear evidence to the contrary, I'm going to pretend that I didn't, right? That's called evasion. And everyone knows that you can do this, right? And the reason you can do this is because you have free will. You have the capacity to think or not to think, right? And this capacity is not magical. It comes with the faculty of reason. To have a rational faculty means that you can use observation and conceptual integration and logic to look at the world, figure out what things are, name them, integrate other ideas, and build a conceptual framework that you can use to get things done in the world. And that faculty is called reason. And a corollary of that faculty is your ability to use it or not to use it. That's all free will is really at base. It's a corollary of the fact that you have this faculty of reason, and you can say, oh, I'm going to use reason and put your mind to work, or you can default to your only other mental faculty that really can guide your life, and it doesn't do it well, and that is your emotional faculty. So if you decide not to go by reason, if you decide not to think, what you're going to do is you're going to go automatically by the only other thing you can go by, and that's your emotions. You might go with the herd. You might do what the crowd is doing because it makes you feel good. Yeah, I'm just going to do. I'm not going to rock the boat. I'm not going to be controversial. I'm just going to go where my tribe does this, so I'm going to go with my tribe here. That's all emotionally deciding to do things rather than saying, well, wait a minute, what's true? What's the fact of the matter here? Those questions are the kinds of questions that thinking involves, right? Thinking is question asking. It's interesting to note that apes, for instance, that ape Coco that was taught sign language for many years, apes can communicate with sign language to some extent, but you know what they don't do and can't do apparently is ask questions. Asking questions is thinking. That's what it means to think in the abstract, the way that human beings do. We're question asking beings. That's what we're able to do. And asking questions is done by choice. That's what it is. You can choose to say, I wonder what's going on there, and then pursue a line of thought. Or you can choose not to do that. You can choose to focus your mind or not to. You can choose to go by reason or by emotion. And so, coming back to the beginning of this question, I know that a lot of Alex's followers, and I think Alex himself, don't believe in free will, at least nominally. But I think that there's a sense in which you recognize something that you maybe just aren't even categorizing as free will, and that is that you know that you are able to use reason or back it off, use reason or not use it. And so think about that. This is Ayn Rand came up with this theory that free will is simply the choice to think or not to think. And it makes perfect sense to me, and I think it probably does to you too. You can introspect and see that you do it, and you can see that you can focus fully or less than fully, and you can also see that you can evade. You can say, I don't want to know it, so I'm going to pretend it doesn't. It's not true. So yes, to convince anyone of my theory, which depends on free will existing, that my theory is true, I'm going to have to both assume that you recognize that you can make choices. And then, even if you're not fully understanding how it is that choice works, by the way, I did a video on this titled, what was a lecture at a conference titled Free Will and Flourishing, excuse me, where I get into some of the arguments against free will, particularly Sam Harris's arguments against free will. And I think it's pretty clarifying because it goes down sort of several rabbit holes that people go down when they're trying to get their head around what free will is. I address things like Sam Harris's claim that well, you don't know what words are going to come up next when you're using words, and you don't. If I say choose a movie, you don't know which movie's going to come up, but there it is. So you're not controlling everything that's happening in your mind and your subconscious. So that's one argument that I address and talk about why that's not an argument against free will. And then I also address the issue of the law of causality. Some people think that the law of causality means that everything that happens is caused by some prior event. And if you think that that's what the law of causality means, you're going to be very confused about how free will can possibly happen, because you're going to say, well, free will is a choice, that's an event. So what event caused that event? And you get this infinite regress. But the way to look at causality is that the event causation theory is false. Events or actions aren't caused by other events or actions. They're caused by entities. They're caused by things. If you take a pool stick and you hit a cue ball with the pool stick, you pushing the pool stick hit the cue ball, right? So entities, you and the cue stick or the pool stick, hit the ball. And in the case of a human being, if you say, well, if I make the choice to think or not to think, and you say, well, okay, but what caused that choice? The answer is I did. I'm the kind of animal that has a rational faculty, and with the rational faculty comes the ability to use it or not to use it. And the choice to use it or not to use it is what we call free will. So anyway, I get into further explanation on this point from several perspectives, and it may help some of you who are wrestling with what free will is. So good question, and you're right that in order to talk about morality, look, the whole field of morality is how should we act? What is good? How do we know it? And then how should we act? At least the normative part of morality is about what we should do. Well, there's no point in telling people what they should do or how they ought to act, right? Should and ought are normative terms, if they don't have any choice about what they're going to do anyway. It would just be pointless to do that. So anyone who even entertains morality as a legitimate subject is accepting free will, at least implicitly. Okay. 8. If life means more than just physical survival, can't suicide in certain cases express a desire to live? Yeah, I think this is a good question and well put. Human life is not just physical survival. We are not just beings of meat. We're not just meat in motion, right? We're not just matter. We have a physical body and we have a consciousness. We're beings of matter and spirit, matter and mind, and we're an integrated being. And the whole, I'm talking to you and using my mind right now, and I'm moving my hands and being here physically, right? And they're integrated. I can have my mind tell me to do something like snap my fingers, and lo and behold, I do it, right? And if somebody pokes me with a pin, and I feel pain and I go, ouch, right? And it affects, so the causation goes both ways. And we're not sure exactly how all that causation happens scientifically yet, but we know that it happens because we see it happening all the time, right? So we are beings of body and mind, matter and spirit, and we need to, if we want to live well, we need to be aware of and account for and satisfy the needs of both aspects of this integrated whole. And so, if we can't do that, if our lives get to a point where maybe physically our body is in really good shape and everything's great there, but mentally, and we are just so run down and depressed, either for chemical reasons or because some horrible thing happened, maybe your whole family is slaughtered before your eyes by some jihadists or something. I mean, this happens. you can completely lose your desire to live. And I have never had such a thing happen or ever been in such a situation. So I'm not going to judge anybody who's there. If someone gets into a position like that and they genuinely do not want to live and they've thought through it and they just can't see any reason to stay alive, it's, I think their choice to not live is precisely as the questioner here puts it, a recognition of the fact that life has to be a certain way to be worth living. It has to be, at least there has to be the potential for beauty and goodness and joy and pleasure and happiness and the things that make life worth living. So yeah, we are not just physical beings, and I think that some suicides are precisely a recognition of the fact that life needs to be a certain way in order to be worth living, and in some cases people can't get it that way, they can't make that happen, and so they decide to exit. And again, I had a very dear friend exit on I think for those very reasons, and it's very sad, but I also understand. I'm not going to judge that anyway. I don't move on from here. I'll start getting teary. Okay. 9. I'm sorry the conversation never got to a critique of the emotivist position. Yeah, we really didn't talk much about emotivism, but frankly, I don't think there's a lot to say about emotivism. I'll say a few words now, but it's not going to be much either. Emotivism is the idea that there's nothing cognitive. There's no, the concepts have no role in what we call morality. It's just emotive noises, boo or rah, right? So if you and I see some woman being raped, and let's say you are against it, and so you say boo. And let's say I'm a horrible, horrible person and I'm for it. And I'm like, oh, this is great. So I say rah, right? That's all that's going on here, according to the emotivists. There's nothing about what this man is doing to that woman that is anything worse than your or my emotional reaction to it. Now, what's wrong with this idea? It takes a fact, which is the fact that we do have an emotional reaction to things that we regard as moral or immoral. That's true. I'm not going to deny that. Emotions are part of the equation. But emotions are not the fundamental thing that we are properly referring to when we say that something is good or bad, moral or evil. What the fundamental thing that we're referring to is the fact that life is, and you're either doing this implicitly or explicitly, and I think explicitly is better. But you can't do it explicitly if you don't understand the theory. So what we're referring to is life is the standard of value. And when someone is doing something to another person that is harming that person's life, whether it's rape or robbery or murder, what's happening here is not wrong because boo. It's not, I mean, if we were just standing around going boo rah, we might as well just be cavemen. We're not cavemen. We're conceptual beings capable of thinking about why we need terms like good and bad, and seeing that the fact of reality that give rise to those terms are the fact that life is the phenomenon that is at the base of them. And if you get this idea, you can see that it's not true that boo and rah are the only things that we mean by these things. What we mean by them is there's a fact that gives rise to the need of values, and that's called life. And when things happen that are good for that, we feel good about it, and our evaluative claims about it are more than just feelings, they're fact claims. Yes, that's excellent that this young lady just got the job that she has worked long and hard to achieve, or that this Olympic athlete just won this medal after she, worked for decades to achieve these skills. And when we say that, we're not just saying boo or rah. We're saying this is a good thing because it's a life-serving thing. And they're not the same thing. It's not true that boo means the exact same thing as bad for life, or that rah means the exact same thing as supportive of life. The emotion is an emotion, and the evaluative cognitive claim is an evaluative cognitive claim. They're different things. They should integrate, and in a healthy soul, they do integrate. If you see some horrible thing happening, like a woman being raped, you feel awful about it, and you want to do something about it. Not just because you feel awful about it, but because you know that this is morally wrong because it's anti-life. And they're very different things that integrate, and they ought to integrate. So emotivism, in my view, is literally silly. It's just, I mean, I'm not going to, in a debate, I'm not going to make my point, well, your theory is silly. But the fact is, if you think about emotivism and you really take it seriously, so all that anyone means, and means isn't even a term that can be used, because the whole point of emotivism is there is no meaning. It's just an emotional ejaculation. That's all the noise is that you're making when you make an evaluative claim. And I don't even think Alex, I think if he really reflected on this, I don't think Alex O'Connor believes this either. I think Alex argues because he's making mental connections, and he's trying to fit things together, and he gets a position that he thinks he can argue and defend, and he's going to argue it and defend it until he feels like he can't. But I don't think that's a good way to do argumentation. I think the way to do argumentation is to step back and say, well, wait a minute, I'm not going to be wedded to any of these ideas. I want to just know what's true. Why do we need evaluative terms? Either we need them or we don't. And I think if you start there, if you ask that question that way and start the inquiry there, you're going to come to a very different conclusion than the idea that, well, anything that we regard as good or bad, all we really mean is boo-rah. That's just not, in my view, that's just not, does not sound viable. Doesn't sound like that's really what's going on. Okay, so you can read more on emotivism, by the way. A.J. Ayer is the main philosopher. He was a positivist who held this view, and there are others, but he's the one who came up with the whole theory of boo-rah, and so you can read up on him, on the internet. Just search his name, you'll find his theory, and it's just not that interesting. But if you want to look at it, go for it. Okay, 10. Do the people who agree with Alex evaluate the debaters here according to an objective standard of value, or do they only express an emotional preference that has no roots in reality? That's a good question, and I just add it here because I think it's a good question. If the people who are agreeing with Alex and saying, yeah, Alex is right, this is right, and Craig's theory is bad, that's really, are they really willing to say, well, we're just saying boo. That's all we're really saying. We're using other words, but the whole meaning of everything we're saying is just boo, boo. So, and apparently I and the people who are supporting my side, we're just here going rah, rah, and the other side's going boo, boo, and that's all that's happening. I don't think anybody really believes that. And if they do, peace be with you on that. But it sounds a little hokey to me. So that's a good question. I'm glad whoever asked it. And then the final question, I'll throw this one in because it's just fun. 11. I don't give a shit what Ayn Rand said. Why doesn't Craig just defend his own ideas? This is a priceless question. So I am defending my ideas. The ideas that I'm telling that I argued for in the debate and that I'm talking about now are ideas that I hold because I see that they're true. And so they are my ideas, but I learned them from Ayn Rand. And they're extremely difficult ideas to come up with. Understanding how to pose the questions of what are values and why do we need them, and then realizing that value is not a primary. It depends on the, presupposes an answer to the question of value to whom and for what, and then whittling your way down to understanding that there's only one fundamental alternative in the universe, and that's existence or non-existence, and it pertains only to a certain kind of thing, and that is living things and all of that. I didn't come up with that. I'm not a millennial genius. I think Ayn Rand was. I think she's in the same vicinity as Aristotle in this arena. And if I'm going to argue and put her theories forward, I'm going to let people know that I'm doing that for two reasons. A, for justice and moral credit, giving Ayn Rand her due. She's the one who came up with the fundamental ideas, but also because if these ideas make sense to someone, I want them to go read Ayn Rand's works. Ayn Rand's works are really powerful. I know philosophers out there, modern philosophers out there, like to mock them, but their mockings are self-mockery ultimately, in my view. But I wrote an article titled "Here's What's Wrong with Ayn Rand's Philosophy," which is worth reading because I point, since nobody ever really attacks Ayn Rand's ideas directly by presenting them as they actually are and then telling us what's wrong with her actual ideas, they almost invariably, or they do invariably, present some kind of a straw man argument and then attack that as if it was Rand's position. So I wrote an article titled "Here's What's Wrong with Ayn Rand's Philosophy," where I present her ideas accurately and then attack them. And so I encourage you to look that up. I think you'll have fun with it. But in answer to the reason or the question, why don't I present my own ideas? I am presenting my own ideas. But I'm also giving Ayn Rand credit for having taught me those ideas, and that's the morally correct way to do this according to an objective standard of moral value. So that's why I'm doing it that way. Again, thank you guys for your questions. I love these ideas and I love talking about them. I like being challenged. So you have any other questions that you think I should address here, or any other thoughts come to mind, please let me know. You can either put them in the chat under the video, or you can go to my website, craigbittle.com, and use the form there, the contact form there. I do encourage you, if you're interested in these ideas, to read some material on this. Just having discussions about this or hearing a debate about it, people use language much less precisely when they're speaking, especially when they're speaking extemporaneously. And so I encourage you to do some reading on this. Read Ayn Rand's book, The Virtue of Selfishness, and especially the opening essay, the introduction and the opening essay, which is titled The Objectivist Ethics. Check out my book, Loving Life, The Morality of Self-Interest and the Facts That Support It. I think if you look into these ideas, you might not agree with them. I think you will find them fascinating and challenging. And my guess is if you spend some time with them, you will say to yourself eventually, oh my goodness, this makes sense. This is true. And if that does happen, by the way, what you then have is an understanding of the fact that there's a moral code that says, hey, everyone should pursue his values, live a beautiful life, respect the rights of others to do the same so we can all live beautiful lives in harmony together. The reward is pretty big. So if this theory is true, that's what comes with it. So I do encourage you to look into it. That's it for today. Thanks for joining me for a rather long episode of Understanding. Stay tuned for some more episodes in the coming days and weeks, and I look forward to chatting with you then. In the meantime, keep loving life.